You're listening to the Place Northwest podcast, your digital resource for the latest insight and analysis on all things property in the northwest of England.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Place Northwest podcast, brought to you in association with Genesis Homes. I'm your host, Dan Whelan. Today I am joined by Nicky Gordon, Chief Executive at Genesis Homes, to talk about the company's recent restructure, challenges facing SME housebuilders, and the potential impacts of recent local government reorganisation in Genesis's Cumbria heartland. Nicky, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get started. Give us a little bit of background about Genesis, where you started to where you are now, and who you are as well.
Genesis is a typical open market developer in terms of building traditional homes. So we build traditional and timber frame homes throughout the Cumbria area. And
you were set up in 2017, is that right? And you were involved in that from the very beginning, right?
We were, yeah. I founded the company in early 2017. We had a original ambition to develop two specific pieces of land which had been in our ownership as shareholders for a few years. We traditionally had redeveloped sort of brownfield remediation sites, things of that nature, and land promoted. And we just saw the opportunity, really. There had been a void left in Cumbria from SMEs. There had been one or two SMEs that had left the market for various reasons, whether it's the challenges that we probably come on to discuss today, or even just through to retirement and things of that nature. We'd seen a large local developer go to a regional level, so there was a bit of a void in behind them in terms of picking up the sort of smaller sites that they no longer fit with their viability. And yeah, so we got going in 2017 on one of them sites in particular in Wigton in West Cumbria, and it was a suck it and see exercise in many ways, because we wanted to see if we could establish several key factors of becoming a larger developer, which was could we develop a house type range of product that people liked aesthetically, but that also were practical, so that they really did meet the growing needs of family housing. Could we establish a brand identity? Certainly, if we were going to go to a larger level, could we differentiate ourselves from becoming a small time self builder or something of that nature into something that was more sort of regionally identified? And I suppose after that, it was whether we could grow a team and a supply chain quickly and develop at the build pace that we would need to in order to do so. And I suppose if we fast forward that story of, so how did we get as far as we have so quickly? We sort of tick them boxes very quickly. By the end of 2017, we started on site at Wigton. We'd sold the first phase of 28 homes. We were building at sort of a build program of 25 weeks, and we were achieving it. We definitely had customers, as I say, because it was sold out, and there was just a real sentimental feel as well in the feedback that was coming from industry and people that your brand identity is bang on. So it energized us to move ahead with a bigger and bolder business plan.
For those listening who aren't really au fait with Cumbria and its geography, tell us a little bit about where it is you develop and why you focus on those particular areas as well.
We're now Cumbria wide, so we've got 8 developments at the moment in operation. That's split over two brands. We were originally Genesis Homes, and come on in a moment to Russell Armour Homes as well, which we acquired in 2021. Originally, we were founded on North and West Cumbria, so very focused around Penrith, Carlisle, and out into the West Cumbria of Workington and Whitehaven. And then in recent years, particularly sort of triggered by that acquisition of Russell Armour Homes, we've pushed into South Lakes and North Lancashire.
Okay, and so tell us a bit about that acquisition, and as well, there was a restructure, wasn't there, earlier this year? Just talk to us a little bit about those.
Yeah. So we acquired Russell Armour in, as I say, in the April of 2021. Russell Armour had been a long-established house builder, 60 years old the year we acquired the company, well established in South Lakeland, North Lancashire, with an excellent track record and a well-established supply chain. And they had a pipeline of land opportunities which really fit with us getting an acceleration into that area. It's been an extremely successful acquisition for us. In the time since then, since 2021 through to this year, obviously Genesis as a group therefore has sort of celebrated its 5 years. It's very much become established as the metronome developer that we wish to become, which was building in excess of 100 homes per year, and having a development pipeline which befits of a regional developer. And I suppose I looked upon my own skill set without sounding extremely modest or otherwise. I'm somewhat entrepreneurial. I like to see ideas come to life, but getting into the nitty gritty and focusing on key performance indicators and looking at figures all day is not necessarily my bag. So I think I've had a good identification of what my own strengths and weaknesses are. And I think a business, once it gets to that medium size, if not moving into a large size, really needs a focus on the day-to-day operation alongside the drive and determination that I would bring. So early this year, January this year, I moved into the chief executive role, and John Blue, who is our land director and has been with the business for, this is going into his 5th year, joined us at the beginning of 2018 as land director, has taken the realm and been promoted into the managing director role.
Right, so all signs point to growth. So my question is then, Cumbria, does that provide you with enough opportunities to grow to the level that you want to?
It does. I think the question's twofold really in terms of Cumbria. It has its challenges. It has its natural geographic challenges. An area natural outstanding beauty in the Lake District National Park also brings its challenges. Currently has sort of a net migration which causes us some concerns in terms of skill shortages, things of that nature. So we, in our own belief and understanding of the county, believe that it has its limits in terms of how much delivery we can achieve year on year. We certainly feel like we're confident that with our existing supply chain and what's out there, that building 150 to 200 homes a year in Cumbria is achievable. But the second part is therefore that if we want to go larger as a group, then we've probably got to broaden our geography. And part of my CEO role is to move us further afield. Let's say we've got one development at the moment in Halton, just outside Lancaster. We've hopefully got another development to start next year in the Lancaster area, and we're very, very active in land buying and if not acquisition in the area.
Yeah. How would you sum up Cumbria as a place to be a developer, all things considered? And then we'll get on to some of the more general issues facing SME house builders, not just in Cumbria, but more generally. So how would you describe it as an SME house builder in Cumbria?
It's extremely unique, and I don't want to become too cliche with that when we have got the Lake District and the National Park. It's a unique area because of what that brings and almost enforces on us developing in the area, which is that I think Cumbria, I think I'm right in saying it's the largest county by landmass. Yorkshire as a whole is, but once it's split into its north, south, east and west, Cumbria is a larger county. And as I say, it is sort of cross-roaded by the M6 corridor and the A66 moving from east to west around the Lake District National Park. So from a supply chain and a delivery perspective, it's a large terrain to cover, and that, as I say, brings its own challenges in logistics and things of that nature. Generally speaking, it's a quieter commute to work. It's a naturally beautiful commute to work. No 2 days are the same, depending on the weather or the outlook, and it makes it a really enjoyable place to live and develop.
Yeah, we'll go on and talk a little bit more about Cumbria and, as I mentioned in the intro, the reorganisation and what the future looks like a little bit later on. But let's get into some of the challenges that you're currently facing then, because there's no secret that the market is tough at the moment. There are headwinds. People keep talking about these headwinds. Some good news recently, at least the Financial Times reporting that we're not heading for a recession. So that's happy news for everyone. So what would you say are the biggest challenges facing Genesis and other SME house builders at present?
Where do you start is probably the bigger question. Obviously, a more macro and national level, we seem to have a Tory government at the moment who don't seem to like development very much. That's certainly the sentiment that seems to be shining through, and that is not helpful really to any of the more micro level challenges that we face. If you start with planning, planning departments are notoriously under-resourced at the moment. And as I say, once you add a sentiment from national government, which is that they're sort of wishing to change policy, or certainly the national planning policy, scrapping housing targets, things of that nature, then it just brings, added disarray into the remit really. So there's we've got issues in the county with nutrient neutrality in a big way at the moment, and scrapping of them targets and things of that nature is just a big
yeah. Let's drill down a little bit deeper into some of those then. So that you mentioned the government's attitude towards housing targets there, repealed the 300,000 homes a year target. That was seen by the industry as a very bad move, sort of playing into the hands of NIMBYs. And you mentioned before about the net migration away from Cumbria. Removing those targets is not going to help address that, is it? If you're taking the approach that build it and they will come, that's going to be a negative for that, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I don't think there was any real understanding of the scrapping it other than NIMBYism, other than what was going on, particularly in the southeast of England, and looking at, party politics and voting and all of that. That had to be the primary driver. So that showed a complete disregard and an ignorance to housing developers. That is not going to help us. As a county, though, we face our own challenges in terms of, you touch on there, in migration and build it and they will come. We have got more work to do as a county. I personally am from Greater Manchester and have become an adopted Cumbrian over many years. And the one thing that always strikes me about the Cumbrian mentality is that we don't shout about how good we are. We don't shout it from the rooftops, and we don't say it loud enough. Whereas if, by contrast, you look at Greater Manchester and you look at some of the former leaders in Bernstein's and the Leases and the mayor and Andy Burnham, you hear them tell you consistently how good they are and everything that they're going to strive and achieve for. And I suppose that's the great hope from the unitary authority. I know you want to talk about that in a moment, but the unitary authority, in terms of maybe by bringing those local authorities together into that collective, that we do see a collective voice and maybe we do see a figurehead. Because certainly post-pandemic, the Lake District, when we look at the human habits and work-life balances and things of that nature, then surely the Lake District and Cumbria becomes something that would become a real priority and somewhere where you could live and work.
It's about harnessing that, isn't it? That movement, I guess. Just to go back to that point about NIMBYism there, we see that across the country, don't we? But I'm picturing, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm picturing a beautiful place like Cumbria, lots of green. Obviously, you mentioned the Lake District National Park. Is NIMBYism and sort of resistance towards development and change something that you have to deal with quite often?
It is, and it's why we need clear policy. We're understanding of them pressures, and I suppose they've become a little bit normal to us. So we don't tend to, look at some of our neighbours to sites and think of them as being NIMBYs, because we largely know what the local collective voice will be. And in many ways, we have such respect for the national park and its outstanding beauty that we wouldn't do something that was going to impinge on that anyways. And I suppose we're also very, very clear in terms of what vernaculars and aesthetics and so on are going to have to look like to develop in that area. So we're already sort of embedded in that as becomes natural to us. But I do go back to the big piece, which is that policy needs to be extremely clear. In South Lakeland, we've had a local plan consultation now for going on probably 2 years, I guess. We were hoping for that to have been published by now, and for whatever reason it hasn't been. Whether that's to do with unitary authority or it's to do with the scrapping of national planning, the amendment to the NPPF. Whatever it is, it's certainly not helping. So, the sooner we have clear understanding, then it obviously makes for easier delivery anyways.
Yeah.
And therefore NIMBYism doesn't really come into it, because we understand what we're there to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that you're embedded in that now. So that whole consultation and dealing with those concerns is just part and parcel of what you do, which stands you in good stead for when you're already looking to expand. That'll stand you in good stead. I want to talk a little bit about Greenbelt as well, because that's all wrapped up in the whole planning piece, isn't it? And I don't know if from Cumbria you've been following the saga that is the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, now known as Places for Everyone, delayed much like the South Lakeland local plan, although for considerably longer. We're still hoping that will get signed off at some stage, but the most recent delay to that was around those changes and to Greenbelt and giving stronger powers to councils to stop development in the Greenbelt. What's your take on that, in terms of your approach as Genesis Homes to developing the Greenbelt and the attitude of the public towards the Greenbelt?
I think the first thing for me to hold my hand up is not a planner by background, and the Greenbelt as it's defined and identified in this country doesn't necessarily affect us in Cumbria. we obviously have the national park, and it's an area of outstanding natural beauty. So we have similar respects. As we're expanding into Lancashire, it does have obviously those green belt requirements. When I started by saying, do I necessarily understand it without having a planning background? I think my concern to it was largely party politics again, in terms of Keir Starmer really brought it to life, and I've read his comments several times, and I'm still not necessarily sure he was really truthfully talking about green belt. He may have been talking about green belt in terms of, again, approaching the southeast of England, but for me, he was maybe just looking at giving what hopefully would be the correct powers to local authorities in terms of identifying sites within their locality that truly work. That if you asked 10 locals, they would tell you that site works for that purpose. I think that's been lost somewhat too many times in some of local policies, local plans that have been influenced by things that aren't necessarily correct for the locality.
Yeah, Starmer a few weeks ago or a couple of weeks ago saying, wasn't he, just to flesh that out, give it some context, that he would welcome development in the green belt, essentially, which is obviously very bold and opposite from what the Tories are saying. And the election is in more than a year's time, but the party politics have already started. Just back on those challenges again, you mentioned nutrient neutrality. Explain that, because I think there'll be a lot of people listening who may have heard of it but are not fully aware of what it is.
Yeah, so nutrient neutrality feels extremely anti-development. It was enforced by Natural England, who seemed to take they took an EU law on phosphates entering watercourses. So they really were looking to impinge restrictions on development that was going to further contaminate watercourses otherwise. But I think, again, you need somebody with far greater technical knowledge than mine, but at the same time, we feel hard done by as an industry, because agriculture, by example, I think is the far biggest polluter, and we don't hear a lot in the press or coming out of government or otherwise on what mitigation measures agriculture needs to put into play by comparison. So we're a small polluter, but it's having a massive, serious effect on planning permissions, which are now held up. They recently, or should I say probably about a year ago now, extended the coverage of nutrient neutrality. It was having a major effect in the south of England, but it took in two main watercourses where we've got planning applications in play, in terms of the River Eden up in North Cumbria. And now even though we have, as an industry, we have proposed solutions, believe that they should be identified and expedited, and therefore permission should be forthcoming. It just seems to be held up in bureaucracy. So I'm led to believe there's over 2,000 homes in applications in North Cumbria which are held up. I think there's 160,000 nationally, 2,000 in North Cumbria, and we've got about 250 of those homes held up in that number.
Do you see a way around this problem? What's the route through to unlocking these homes?
There's a series of mitigation measures which have been put forward, from treatment through to offset of different lands. So as I say, we're sort of dumbstruck now as an industry, because the problem occurred. We identified solutions. We didn't necessarily outright resist. We identified a solution because we need to keep developing. That's the basis of our business. And really now it needs, as I say, that's probably where we're lacking so much with current government sentiment, is so anti-development, because we really need them to be right behind us in terms of expediting those decisions with Natural England.
Yeah, it's almost as if you look at some of the policies that emerged certainly over the last few months, and they're kind of contrary to the fact that we're in a housing crisis. You would have thought they'd be going the other way. But I want to talk about another challenge that is being, not just SME house builders but developers in general, is the challenge of net zero. And it is a challenge that the industry, I think, largely is rising to, but there's a cost implication there, isn't there? And obviously that cost implication probably impacts the smaller businesses more. To talk to us about how Genesis is approaching that pursuit of net zero and how you're going about it.
The Part L change in building regs comes in next month in June. We've adapted to that change very, very quickly. So as an industry, you referred to it there, that comes with a cost. I think it's added somewhere in the region of about £15,000 to our build costs on each home on average. And obviously that has a big effect on viability and profitability. So that is fundamental, but as I say, we've adapted to it well. At the same time, we're looking ahead. We've got a pilot project at the moment called EcoGen. That is a net zero emitting home in operation. It's an extremely smart home, full of smart technology, and we feel like we're a market leader in that. So we've undertaken a pilot project in a small village called Colthwaite, just outside Penrith, and we really are now, the homes are being lived in. They've been lived in since November, December last year, and we really are just looking to see what the statistics and the results are that come out of them homes over a 12-month period. But all signs at the moment are incredibly strong and surpassing what the expectations were. So 0 bills, extremely energy efficient, self-sufficient in the main, and it's only good for the future.
But what's the markup on those homes as a percentage compared to sort of the normal product? What's the cost of achieving 0 bills? Because it's an amazing thing to hear, isn't it? I think everyone listening to this their ears probably pricked up when you said that. But what's the cost?
Yeah, well, we without giving too much of our sort of business secrets away, we only, inverted commas, wanted to achieve the increase in bill cost because it was a pilot project without looking to profiteer too much out of the opportunity. So I think our costs are ranging between £25,000 and £35,000 in terms of that increased build specification.
Okay.
I think when we did the calculations initially at concept stage, it was looking like it would be circa 20-year payback on your investment. That was obviously looking at what current energy bills were. Obviously, in that time window of the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen energy bills go however many hundreds of percents increase. I think the last time we looked at it, it was down to about 8 years. So it could now become a very, very shrewd investment.
Okay. And this is the plan is to roll this out, across your patch? Yeah,
I think we were very, very specific in looking at the specification. We wanted, so it is our existing house type range with you could call it the bolt-on specification. We won't ever offer it as a bolt-on. It will be either eco-gen or not. But yeah, that is very, very adaptable. It's something that we could change from our next development onwards, and that's certainly the sentiment that we're going for at the moment.
What's the thinking behind not offering it as a bolt-on? Is that because you can't really do it properly if you do it in that way?
Without sounding overly restrictive, we try to be as efficient as we can in the process of build. So we were quite rigid in how we do that, and we don't really want to have the challenges as well of one home to the next being eco-gen or not, and what that might bring in its own challenges.
Okay. And in terms of the net zero agenda, then it sounds you're making strides, and you've got this prototype which sounds amazing. Are you finding it to be a headache, the whole net zero thing? Are you sick of hearing about it, or is it a challenge that you're relishing and that you find to be quite an important one?
Oh, it's certainly important. We're stating the obvious. We're all aware of what the outcome would be in terms of climate disaster if we don't all start to act ourselves. So it's certainly important to us. I think where I alluded to our project being net zero emitting in operation. That means that we've got the major piece of work to do, which is looking at what our embodied carbons are in the construction of our homes. That is a major task. Again, I don't claim to be an expert on it, but from what I understand from the experts, nobody has yet come up with the standard methodology for how you calculate that. So we're already in a challenging situation of not actually knowing how we're going to measure it anyway. So yet again, probably going back to sort of national government and saying, if somebody can specify this, then we as an industry seem to be ready to step up to the challenge. And we are seeing that, widespread now. There's a number of developers with similar pilot projects on the go or similar pilot research programs. And so again, we're saying we're there, we're willing, maybe just need to help us out a little bit in terms of getting even better at it.
Yeah, certainly if you look at the operational carbon element, the last couple of years have seen the industry take great strides in addressing that, and embodied carbon does seem like the next frontier, doesn't it? And maybe not just working out that standard methodology, but some grants from government, maybe people they need help to bridge that gap. You mentioned there that the markup in just achieving operational net zero, so imagine the markup trying to achieve embodied as well. One last challenge I want to explore a little bit is land prices. What's the story in Cumbria at the moment? Are you being competitive in that market? Are land prices, have they corrected themselves after the craziness of the pandemic? And are you being gazumped by volume house builders? Give us a snapshot of the land value situation.
You've answered much of the question in terms of how you put it to me. It's varied, extremely varied. It, as I say, probably go back to the comments around the size of the county in terms of where, we're county-wide coverage, whereas other developers, particularly national developers, they might be based out of head offices in Manchester or coming across from Newcastle, and therefore they have a different strategic approach to maybe South Cumbria or the north and east of Cumbria. So we can find them a challenge because it depends what their own business plan is at that time, how much of a need have they got for land, and therefore how strong are they prepared to bid and adjust their own viability in that regard. It's certainly rebalanced. The answer to that part is that it's rebalanced, and that's a positive. But yeah, it has its own. Cumbria has its own challenges depending on the appetites of basically outside developers coming in.
Okay,
that can be the variability.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about this reorganisation of the council landscape in Cumbria then. So the county council and the district councils have been replaced by two unitary authorities. I'm going to hand over to you now to explain the rest. So tell us whether that's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, and what your concerns are and what the opportunities are.
And it's a massive question. We obviously have got high hopes in terms of that collective voice that I referred to. It is a great opportunity for the county in that regard. It should also bring positive, certainly simplify, give us greater ease in terms of understanding policy, because we no longer have to assess 6 different policies depending on which locality we're operating or making a planning application within. So yeah, it should give greater clarity. The biggest sort of question is how quickly it mobilises itself, and does the positive sentiment that has been established in having a unitary authority actually bear fruit? Question marks still persist in terms of who is going to be the voice of those two councils, and the sooner we get to see that, and the sooner that we see the positions and the employment within those councils fulfilled, the better. Because if we don't, then it becomes a little bit of a question of, well, why then?
And in terms of the actual geographical split, so we've got Westmoreland and Furness and Cumberland. They're the two councils, and it's an east-west split, as far as I understand it.
Mainly a north-south split.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, that's probably not what wishing to just slant a negative every time, but they have taken in Eden, which we're based in Penrith, which is Eden,
mm-hmm.
And that has been placed into Westmoreland and Furness when it was expected to be within Cumberland. So already, you're saying the geography of from Barrow and Furness to Penrith, from the most southern part to the most northern part, is a big area.
Okay.
So
what might the knock-on impact of that be, do you think?
Well, I think we're just looking to see that they've got sort of balanced focus on their areas. You can understand it's natural for humans to go to what they know. So when the Westmoreland and Furness Council has been formed, there's a number of their leadership and the senior management, as I see it, are former Furness Council operatives. So you can understand that they're going to have a natural understanding of that, and they're going to have to try and understand what was happening in the Eden area and what the focus is for Eden. And again, I just go back to it. It's vitally important they do get a grasp of the responsibilities across them areas, rather than just be sort of narrow focused on what they know.
Yeah, I'm sure the private sector will hold them to account and make sure that they're doing that and doing their homework on the different areas. So talking about Cumbria more widely now, so in terms of, we've had the reorganisation, we'll watch this space in terms of whether that's a success or not. What next for Cumbria? Like, what should we be looking out for? Where are the growth areas? What should we be excited about or not excited about? How do you make it a more, and this is especially poignant for you as a house builder, how do we make it a more desirable place to live rather than just be seen as a place to visit? It
has got a big role to play in terms of its brand Cumbria promotion. I go back to probably 4 or 5 years ago. There was a Cumbria-led presentation on their vision for Cumbria at the time. They were placing Cumbria as the centre of the UK, if not centre of the universe. And by that, they were talking about how they could have a massive marketing programme in terms of making Cumbria the centre point axis, and saying how you can be in London in 3 hours, you can be in Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Newcastle within 2 hours by our train networks and road networks, and then obviously onwards in terms of the universe was that you can get connectivity anywhere in the globe. I was extremely taken by it. I thought it was a strong message. I thought, as I say, when you play on the natural assets of Cumbria and the Lake District, surely that becomes a very easy marketing job. And we've not seen it. Now, what the disruption's been many. There's been pandemic. There's obviously been the announcement of the Unitary Authority, some underfunding of let, etc. And all of that creates an ambiguity and disruption. But I come back to, but now we've established a Unitary Authority, we've got over a pandemic, we've probably been strengthened in terms of that message post-pandemic, that work-life balances, wishing to have recreation on your doorstep, clean air pollution, etc. Well, what better place to possibly be in than Cumbria? So it is a land of opportunity in that regard for development. I think there's some focus areas. The West Coast needs some specific focus in terms of inward investment. We've obviously got the British Energy Coast there, and that underpins it, which is incredibly strong. But at the same time, there's some social deprivation problems there, and things that really do need focused attention. And for me, in terms of looking at what's next for Genesis and where we go, and we'd probably like to leave some sort of legacy behind, and Barrow in Furness is something that we're currently looking at in quite a big way. We've both myself personally and previous life in civil engineering, we resisted Barrow mainly because of its sort of geographical difficulties in transport in particular. Getting there is a bit of a slog. Yeah. And we certainly avoided it in the early business plan of Genesis because, again, we didn't want to be, we wanted to be somewhere where we've got quick access, quick wins, basically. That would be a bit clever for any business plan. But now, as we move into the future and become more strategic, Barrow seems to have a lot of focus. It's got major investment with BAE, and I think, I don't know whether it's just a personal thing, and I'm harbouring an ambition. I think I watch a lot of going back to my childhood and watching sort of Salford Quays and Trafford Park, and even some of the things that Peel have got on their horizon at the minute with Manchester Waters or Wirral Waters and things of that nature, and sort of saying, well, Barrow is very akin to that sort of vision, and it needs somebody to, again, it goes back to who's going to be the figurehead, who's going to point and say that this needs to happen, but also who's going to embolden that vision, because the links to Barrow are the slog that I described. To go down the A590 as you come off at Kendal and know that you've got a good hour drive from there down windy roads, it doesn't really appetite. Yet there's been a vision for a tidal bridge to go from sort of the Morecambe, Heysham Bay area across. And when you've just had an announcement like the Eden project in the Morecambe area, then surely you're starting to think a bit wider than just employment and BAE, and actually saying this will open up the whole of the Furness Peninsula, the access to the Southern Lake District in a different perspective. And surely that's just an absolutely massive opportunity. So some focus areas, as I say, for different reasons in terms of huge opportunity with Barrow in Furness, but looking up the West Coast, there's some challenges.
Yeah, I mean, you've officially got me excited about Barrow, which I didn't think I would say coming into this. But yeah, it sounds like a fantastic opportunity within, as you, to put it in your words, a land of opportunity. So one to watch, most definitely. We have run out of time, but Nicky, it's been really great to chat to you about Genesis and about Cumbria in general. I really appreciate you taking the time. That is all we have time for on this episode of the Place Northwest podcast. A big thank you to Nicky for joining us. To find out more about Genesis Homes, visit genesis-homes.co.uk, and for all the latest property news and analysis from across the region, including Cumbria, head to placenorthwest.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening.